Could it be that your relationship or your relationships today are just a symptom that you are caught in a loop of repeating a pattern from a traumatic childhood where you're trying to please mommy and daddy, right? You're still trying to look for the validation and the approval, right? You're still trying to get the worth, right? A lot of people don't realize this, but what's actually happening is that their relationships are just based around their mommy and daddy shit. It's not good or bad or right or wrong, but it is something to be seen for what it is, because if you don't realize that all that you're doing is repeating a pattern from childhood, you're only going to continue doing that, right? You're only going to continue attracting people that you project mommy and daddy onto, and you're going to continue living the same patterns over and over again. And the fascinating thing is that a lot of people are actually living this way in their relationships, and they don't even realize it. It's actually very easy to be unconsciously and subconsciously projecting mommy and daddy onto your partner, for instance, or your relationships, right? Friendships, romantic, it doesn't matter, right? What matters is that the reality is that you were traumatized as a child. We all were, right? Whether big or small. We were all traumatized as a child. And a lot of us are actually just unconsciously and subconsciously projecting mommy and daddy out onto people. And it looks like craving validation and approval and worth from the external, right? When instead, all that we really need to do is realize that we are really in childhood, in a traumatic childhood, with this open loop, right? That's what repetition compulsion is, right? You look at your life, right? And if you are to see that something happened in childhood, right? Something traumatic, right? And then over time, you start to realize a pattern. The pattern is what you want to look for, right? The pattern that started right there and continued there and there and there and there and there. And it doesn't stop until you do something about it. That's the reality of repetition compulsion, right? But what if your adult relationships are actually just based around your mommy and daddy shit, and you're trying to change or gain something, like you're trying to change your mom and dad through your relationships, or you're trying to gain something from your mom and dad through your relationships, right? It's wild. And I would argue that that is, even in and of itself, enmeshment, its own thing, right? But the way to get out of that is to bring yourself back to you, to do the work on yourself, to heal, to understand what it is that actually fucked you up in the first place, right? It's very easy for people to get caught up in relationships that mirror childhood and mommy and daddy. I've actually been looking at it in my own life recently. Last night I had a wild fuck. I mean, it's things that I already knew. I love how much more you can know about something the more you sit with it, right? And the more you understand yourself, the more you understand why it is you do what you do, right? Like, I had a total like awakening revelation last night, even though it was already based around things, or it was based around things that I already knew, right? And it just was coming more and more full circle. It was making more and more sense, right? Um, we are oftentimes just repeating a pattern. We are oftentimes just on autopilot. We are oftentimes just caught inside of comfort and familiarity. One of the biggest things to look at here is the word familiarity. Comfort along with it as well, but familiarity, right? Familial, family. So much of what we do in our adult lives, especially if we're unaware of it, is based around what it is that we learned in the family of origin, right? The maybe the lack of individuation, right? Maybe you learned enmeshment. You learned to be enmeshed with your family, and you learned that that is intimacy, which it's not. You learn that that is love, which it's not. Um, you may have actually learned that love. Here's a here's a groundbreaker, right? And this is wild. You may have learned that love is painful, right? And so you actually seek relationships where that is reinforced because that's what you learned. You learned that love is painful. Love isn't painful. Healthy love is not a painful experience. It's actually a very wonderful, lovely, and glorious experience. It really is. Um, Unhealthy love in systems of enmeshment where you learned to intertwine love with enmeshment is painful. Enmeshment in and of itself, boundarylessness, is painful, right? So this idea, this belief that I had throughout my entire life that love was painful, and that if whatever it was that I had wasn't painful, then it wasn't love. Like this is how like fucked up things get, right? You learn this belief that love is painful, all the while not even realizing that it's actually not love that is painful. It's not to say that you don't love the person. It's more so to say that, oh, the reality of the matter is that you're enmeshed, and that's why you're experiencing pain in the relationship. Enmeshment is a very painful experience, and a lot of people don't realize it. I didn't realize it for the longest time. I always thought that when I was enmeshed with people, it meant that I loved them and that I was in love with them, right? Um, but the reality of the matter is that enmeshment is a very painful dynamic, right? And if you don't realize it for what it is, if you don't understand what it is that's actually going on there, you're not going to think anything twice of it. You're not going to think anything differently of it. You're just going to see it for the thing that you believe it is, right? Healthy love is not painful. And that's the wildest thing. One of the wildest things that I've learned throughout my life, especially more recently, is that love is actually not painful. And so that makes me look at like all of my relationships and be like, wow, so these were all enmeshed. That's wild. That's absolutely wild. Right? So are you really just repeating patterns in adulthood from a traumatic childhood? Right? Are you really just projecting your mommy and daddy shit onto people and you're calling that love? You're calling that relationship. You're calling that the best thing you've ever experienced. One of the one of the fascinating things, one of the most fascinating things is that the most traumatic relationships, this says so much. The most traumatic relationships that I've had in my adulthood, I had previously called or labeled the best relationships that I've ever had in my life. It's so interesting how much we don't realize when we don't know what we're actually like, when you're unaware of what's actually going on. Oh, it feels right. It feels like home. It feels familiar. Well, no. It's just, I mean, yeah, it is familiar because it's familial. It's based in family. It's based in your FOO, the family of origin stuff, right? And that's just the reality of it, right? So are your adult relationships really just a mirror to your dynamics with mommy and daddy or mommy or daddy, right? These are our first relationships that we have in childhood is to mommy and daddy. And they shape what it is that we are attracted to and what it is that we attract as we grow older and transition into adulthood. And if we're unaware of the dynamic of our mommy and daddy stuff, we're going to be walking with either closed eyes or blindfolds into an oblivion of absolute fuckery and chaos and bullshit that is just further creating the same pattern over and over again. That's the reality of repetition compulsion. We are trying to unconsciously and subconsciously recreate the same traumatic childhood dynamics. That's what repetition compulsion is. That's what so many people experience as they grow older. right? Oh, let me hang on to what it is that's comfortable and familiar from my traumatic childhood. I'm just going to continue repeating the same pattern over and over and over again and just stay on autopilot like that. That's all it is. That's all it is. It's so easy to be on autopilot, projecting mommy and daddy shit onto other people and just continue repeating the same traumatic shit over and over again. That's how it works. And the reality of it is that nothing changes until you wake up from it. It's like Neo waking up from the Matrix, right? With Morpheus ripping the thing out of his mouth, and he's just sitting there having fucking seizures and stuff, and he's waking up from the repetition compulsion. He's like, "Oh my god!" Right? You don't change. You really can't change that which you are unaware of. That's the reality of it.